Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Mr. Jim Cunningham, you, sir, are a prince.
I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm verklempt.
Well, I've just been, for another project, been reviewing the stuff I've been doing for the last few years, and just about everything that I've done, if you look like, why did that start? It's something Cunningham did. Oh, something Cunningham. Oh, you wrote about Jack the Ripper. Oh, I got that from Cunningham. You wrote about a magician. Oh, I got that from Cunningham. Oh, you're doing a Christmas Carol. Oh, I got that from Cunningham. You've been an enormous influence, and I'm sorry to see it end, but it's not ending. It's not ending. We are well into season 5 of Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast. This is episode 16. We are deep into the planning of season 6, which is going to have some fun surprises, along with, if you folks keep sending me ideas for magicians who don't make their living as a magician but are otherwise pretty great. I reached out to David Regal. He had a fantastic idea, because of course he did. Anyway, so just keep those ideas coming. But today we are going to not only listen to chapter 16 of The Linking Rings, which takes place in, if I'm remembering it properly, one of my favorite places to go in London. But first, we're going to revisit a couple ideas from our past guest, Joshua Jay.
This is a really, in re-listening to it, the bullet catch trick itself is one that has fascinated me since I started working on hauntings, which goes back to 1985. And it really had no frame of reference before that for the bullet catch trick, but it was something that Eugene and I talked about. And how could what could I, is there a way to, and Eugene would always stop. No one should do that trick. And Joshua Jay, maybe the foremost expert on it right now, and we get to listen to his thoughts on the bullet catch.
Yeah, I'll put the full conversation in the show notes, the link to that. But in that he recounts several kind of harrowing tales of magic gone wrong. I mean, really, well-named tragic magic. And then you wanted to get a little more personal about his personal perspective on that topic.
Have you ever been tempted to or wanted to perform either the bullet catch or some other illusion to put yourself in real danger, not theatrical danger, but real danger?
The general answer is no. I think the more I learn and research, I spent about 5 years researching various tragic magic angles. And where I come out on that is that I recognize that I think it's a human flaw in all of us. It's the same impulse that has us watching trashy reality television of people with fractured lives and bad things happening, and we delight in their misery and so on. I think it comes from that sort of place, and I just don't want my work to reflect that. But to answer your question specifically, we filmed a TV pilot at one point. Sadly, it never aired, with the bullet catch. And it was one of the scariest things I ever did in my life. I did it in LA, at a theater in LA, a one-time performance only thing. We had policemen there to mark the bullets and fire. And it was, I was chained to a post and catching it in my teeth. And it's super nerve-wracking, even when you're doing what all these other performers did, which is take precautions so that it doesn't actually have to be dangerous, but there's always that risk. And so much of the time, particularly with the bullet catch, what's scary is that you don't have all the control. I do needle swallowing, which, if you do it properly, is a very safe trick to perform. But it's all on you, right? And I just talked to a performer not even 2 months ago who had to go to the emergency room because he violated the one thing you can't do when you do the needle swallowing trick. And I was like, why on earth would you do blank? And I don't want to say what it is because there is a secret to this illusion. But he just was sort of like, I don't know. I was psyched out. I was sitting there saying to myself, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And then he did that. It's like the one thing you don't want to do, but he did this. And so I do needle swallowing, and that's an amount of danger that I'm willing to to accept, and you take precautions and you follow safety guidelines, and you're going to be okay. But with the bullet catch, you do have somebody pointing a loaded gun at you, and it's just tough.
So what advice would you give to a magician out there listening who's thinking about doing something that might be a little bit on the dangerous side? What would you tell them?
Frankly, I would tell them don't. I mean, as the person who's perhaps done as much research as anybody else on this arcane topic of magic that is dangerous, I can tell you that none of the people who failed thought, yeah, I'll probably risk my life. They all thought they had it under control. They all thought that it couldn't go wrong. And I would look at more nuanced and better ways to raise the stakes. I started off by saying that I think that this impulse for danger comes from raising stakes, from trying to increase the drama. It is the easiest, most crass way to raise the stakes, but it's not the only way. You can tell a really amazing, true personal story. You can position the audience to think one way and then surprise them by having it turned around and be totally different. There are other ways to raise the drama than danger, and I think it's a very good exercise to learn how to develop those theatrical muscles rather than danger.
Yeah, developing theatrical muscles that don't involve danger is a really smart way of doing it, of finding a way to tell a story that is engaging without putting anyone in danger. He's so much fun to listen to.
He really is. Smart guy.
One of the thoughts that he offered was that none of these people who failed thought, I'm going to risk my life. They all thought they had it under control. They all thought they knew what the outcome would be. And that's what we would call hubris, I guess. Pride coming before a fall.
It's one of those Greek tragedy things. Hubris shows up a lot in those, and in Shakespeare. Pride does come before a fall.
And it's, I think what Josh was saying is find a more nuanced and a better way to raise the stakes, which got me thinking, you don't do anything quote unquote dangerous in your show, but you have for years done the needle through the arm.
Right.
Is that as risky as it's ever gotten for you? And is that even risky in any way?
There's a cost to it, but it is not risky. I'm not in danger. It's not, but there is a cost to it. At least for me, the way I do it, there's a cost to it. And it's not a big cost, but there's something. I was reminded listening to this of our conversation with Nick Mohammed, who did Houdini's Upside Down.
The water torture cell over 100 times.
Right. And was told going in, hey, if you're going to do it that many times, something's going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And your life will be in danger. And I think I said in that interview, I'd have shut it down right then. I'd have said, I'm out of the contest. But that idea that, well, I'm going to do it so many times that, all of the bugs will be worked out, that doesn't really hold up. The more you do something, the more likely it seems to me that something could go wrong. And with the bullet catch or the upside down, Houdini's Upside Down, bad things could happen.
Yes. So why do them even at all? Although I believe that the Penn and Teller version, nothing can go wrong the way they have that set up.
Well, let's knock on wood. Let's say our prayers. Let's, I mean, they've been doing it for a lot of years, and they must have it figured. But I tend to walk down the same path that Josh will walk down. Is let's find a different way to hook our audience and be compelling rather than risking our lives. And I think, Houdini certainly risked his life. They're hanging upside down over a public square, trying to get all of these things are risky and compelling. He got huge crowds because they came thinking this might be the time that it goes horribly wrong. but when you think about compelling pieces of theater or compelling pieces of magic, I was thinking in listening to Joshua J about uh, Derek Delgadio's in and of itself.
Yeah.
Never in danger, but there's not a moment of that show that isn't completely engaging and locked in. And when it ends, I had tears. It's so beautiful and so compelling, and not for a minute was his life in the balance. So I tend to go that way, but love just about everything I've ever seen Penn and Teller do.
Well, good advice from Joshua J. Love hearing from him. And speaking of things we love, there's just no way to segue into this thing other than that. It's my turn this time because it's episode 516.
Even.
And I'm going to turn you on to something maybe you've seen one or more of these. There are two comedians in England named Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, they put out a movie called The Trip.
Yeah.
And The Trip was just the two of them. I believe Steve had been asked by a magazine to write some restaurant reviews from some restaurants in Northern England over the course of a week. So he and Rob go together because Steve's on the outs with his girlfriend. And it's a quasi-documentary, although they never acknowledge that there's cameras there. And cameras are places where cameras would not be, but you have to go with it. It's directed by a guy named Michael Winterbottom. And it just follows these guys, the movie, over those 5 or 6 days as they banter and bicker in the car and over their meals. And you see the different foods being prepared and you hear them react to them. But it's really about these two guys, Steve Coogan, who is a very successful comedy actor, also now a serious actor. He did a wonderful job as Stan Laurel in
Correct.
Stan and Ollie. He has written movies that very dramatic. He also did Alan Partridge. Anyway, he is, in his mind, a couple steps up from Rob Brydon, who's had a very successful career as a presenter and as a voice talent, as an actor. And they just allow that jealousy and human nature to come through. And it isn't that Rob is jealous of Steve. It's Steve always finds a way to be jealous of something Rob is doing and wanting to one-up him. And I admire the honesty that they both portray in what is a dishonest movie, because it's not really happening. It's pretend, and they are improvising it. And they are talking about family members who don't exist and spouses and girlfriends who don't exist. It's all played by actors, but it seems very real. Anyway, turns out that The Trip was actually a TV series in England, a 6-episode, 6 half-hour episodes, which they edited into a 90-minute movie, so they cut a lot of stuff out. And you can, on the Criterion channel, if you have that, go and watch all 6 episodes of that. And then there's a second one where they go to Spain, and one where they go to Greece, and one where they go to Italy. And every one of them, they did a feature version of it, and then the 6-episode version of it. And you're going to be fine with either one. You just get a lot more bickering and a lot more Michael Caine impressions.
I was just going to say, worth the price of admission when they start dueling Michael Caine impressions.
Yeah.
It's worth your time just to see those moments.
Did you see him in The Dark Knight Rises? And his voice gets even more emotional than it's ever done in the past before. I don't want to bury you, Batman. I will not put you into the ground in a little box. I will not do it, Master Bruce. I will not do it.
I'm not going to bury another Batman.
Another Batman? How many Batmans has he been burying? How many are there? I've buried 14 Batmen
I've buried
so far,
14 Batmen.
And their little pointy ears into the box.
I'm not going to bury another nylon cloak with pointy ears that people wear at birthday parties.
With a little belt, the very wide belt that is flattering to a man with an expanded girth. I won't do that to you, Master Bruce. I will not do it to you.
And I won't make the voice like that.
The voice goes even higher. He's basically yodeling.
They have very definite ideas of how he should sound. Anyway, it's any one of the Trip films, or if you can track down the TV series, are worth seeing. Because Steve Coogan doesn't seem like a nice guy sometimes, and he really allows that to come through. There's no vanity at all in these movies. He is Steve Coogan, and the other one is Rob Brydon, and they are very much themselves, but also constantly trying to entertain and one up each other. So that's my, I love it this time around. If you had a chance to see any of the 4 movies, or if you can dig a little deeper and see the TV series on which they're based. Also, the scenery is fantastic, and the food looks, except for the fish, the food looks really, really, really good.
I don't like fish. You can't say except for the fish. The people are going to think there's something wrong with the fish.
There
There's
is something wrong with the fish. I don't like fish. I'm not going to eat
Nothing
fish.
from the sea.
Nothing
is
from the
done.
sea. Yes, nothing from the sea. Anyway, that's why I love that. What do you got for us this time, Jim?
Well, I don't know. Have I talked about Bruce Springsteen on this podcast ever?
Boy, let me think. Yeah, I think he's come up once or twice.
Well, he has released Tracks 2. So
Okay.
originally he released Tracks years and years ago. And I'll describe it this way. It's like panning for gold with a good friend.
Okay.
There are lots of tracks on this 7-album set of Tracks 2 that, there's probably a reason they didn't end up being released on one of his albums. But then about every 4th song you go, oh, wow, what? I got to listen to that again. And typically for me with Springsteen, even the stuff, except for the Born to Run album, which hit me like a freight train, and that's the reason I'm still here. There oftentimes it's the 2nd or 3rd or 4th listen that I go, oh man, that's brilliant, and I didn't pick that up in the first 3 times. So I'm panning for gold with Bruce Springsteen in Tracks 2, 7 albums of music that he recorded but has not released, and apparently that's far from the end of what's in the vault. But I'm enjoying listening to things he put effort and time into, but has sat on for 30 years, thinking it's not time yet. Well, I guess it's time. And so Tracks 2 by Bruce Springsteen, you can pan for gold, and you're going to find some.
I will put a link in the show notes to that, and probably somewhere. Can you think of one song that jumped out that?
Oh, there's so many good, and the interesting thing is you're going to get alternate takes on stuff that did make an album, like My Hometown. There's a version of My Hometown which is on the Born in the USA album that is on Tracks. And it's in talking to a fellow Springsteen aficionado, I said it sounds like it's just pitched too high. He's trying to sing it almost in a falsetto, and I'm not quite sure what the thinking was there. But it's really interesting to listen to an alternate take of a song that I'm very familiar with. This is the iterations of his music, for me, fascinating to hear him in the journey to what we know as the finished product that makes the album. Here's a version or 2, as sometimes the case is, where you're hearing him sort of think it through, or try it this way once, or let's try it that way once. And I find that just fascinating.
It sounds great. It sort of reminds me of the Peter Jackson Beatles documentary, where you could see them. You get a chance to see the iteration until they get the one they like, and that's what Bruce has given you. All right, that's it for this part. Let's move on to the real reason we're here, which is to listen to chapter 16.
Baby. Okay, we're reading The Linking Rings. So just recap chapter 15.
Sure. It was dinner at Baxter's house. They're talking about why someone would be doing these murders, what are the motivations, and then the chapter ends with Eli running into the maid Gwendolyn, who's quite upset because it's impossible to work for Miss Hess, because Miss Hess always knows what's going on around here. And that takes us right into chapter 16.
Chapter 16. As my uncle had predicted, McHugh persuaded the London police to exhume Archie Banks' grave. This, it was felt, would set to rest any fears that Archie might have somehow faked his death and was now exacting a murderous vengeance on the magicians he felt had wronged him. It was a long shot, and McHugh was the first to admit it. But, he had gone on to say, experience has taught me there is value in leaving no stone, or, in this case, grave, unturned. Consequently, a small band of us found ourselves seated in a surprisingly cheery pub just a stone's throw from the lovely but remarkably creepy Highgate Cemetery. We were eating a traditional pub lunch while waiting to hear the results of the nearby grim excavation. Baxter, of course, sat at the head of the long table, with Harry and the Templetons taking up one side, while Megan, Angus, and I sat on the other. Once again, Baxter's celebrity status paid off, as the barman himself provided tableside ordering and delivery, a rare occurrence you're not bloody likely to see repeated at other pubs, Angus was quick to point out. Our food had been served, and we were all in the midst of eating when the door swung open and McHugh entered. He spotted us and made his way across the room. "What have they found?" Harry asked as he stood and reached for another chair. McHugh waved it away and gestured for Harry to sit back down. "Nothing, as of yet," he said, looking over our small group. "The earth mover has just been loaded off the truck. I told the yard I'd be right back. I just needed to pop over and pick up my assistant." We all looked around, wondering where in the bar this new colleague might be seated, and then noticed McHugh had trained his gaze upon me. "My eyes are not what they once were," he said, "and so another pair might be of help. Plus, I'm guessing your friends here would appreciate a play-by-play. Grab your phone, your sandwich, and follow me." I did as I had been instructed, and moments later, we were walking through the ancient arch that welcomes you into the sprawling confines of Highgate Cemetery. Can you folks hear me okay? "Red 6, we read you loud and clear. What's your 20? I recognized the voice as Roy Templeton's. "Just a few feet away from Archie Banks' grave," I said quietly, as I adjusted my Bluetooth's earpiece's position in my ear. "They're just getting ready to fire up some of the heavy equipment." At McHugh's suggestion, I was talking to the group back at the bar via my mobile. They were all huddled around Megan's phone, which was on speaker. "Have a little respect," I could hear Roxanne shushing Roy. "He's surrounded by dead people." "Just like a regular Wednesday matinee for me," Roy answered. This was followed by a small yelp from Roy, which was probably the result of a punch on the arm from his long-suffering wife. The location of Archie Banks' grave was easy to spot, at least today, as it was surrounded by various police officials, from uniformed police constables to Detective Inspector Matthews and her compatriots. D.I. Matthews was conferring with what appeared to be the leader of a group of groundskeepers, one of whom sat atop a small earth mover, waiting for the official word to get started. "How did McHugh get permission to do this so quickly?" Megan asked quietly in my ear, as much to the group gathered around her as to me. "Apparently Archie Banks had no heirs, so there was no family to deal with," Angus said, trying to match her quiet tones. "If he had no heirs, who did he leave his estate to?" she said, clearly puzzled. "Given the state of his career before he died," I distantly heard DeVries say clearly several feet from Megan's phone, "I would be very surprised if he had anything resembling an estate to leave to anyone." "At the time, there wasn't even enough to pay for the funeral," Angus said. "It was Baxter who kicked in for the cemetery plot. The rest of us pooled our money and bought the coffin." "That was very considerate of you," Megan said. "Yes, I suppose it was," DeVries agreed. All was quiet for a few moments, which was a relief for me, as the voices in my head were making it hard for me to focus on whatever it was McHugh had brought me along to focus on. I looked over at the gravesite. their comments about paying for the funeral still literally ringing in my ears. "So, who bought the headstone?" I asked, gesturing to the weathered gray stone surrounded by brambles and weeds. I then realized that for the audience I was speaking with, gestures were at best superfluous, and to anyone in the cemetery, I looked at Tad Looney. Silence at the other end of the Bluetooth suggested the group had been stymied by this innocent question. "Hello?" I asked tentatively. "They're all shrugging their shoulders and shaking their heads," Megan explained. "I'm surprised you can't hear the rattling of our brains and the creaking of our limbs," Roy added, followed by another of his famous explosive laughs. The headstone looked like all the others around it, although newer than most. 30-plus years in the ground made Archie Banks a relative newbie at Highgate Cemetery, so the lettering on his gravestone lacked the worn and nearly illegible quality of many of the others nearby. Along with his name and the years of his birth and death, the stone also featured an engraving of a single flower positioned directly above his name. Since the earth mover had not begun to excavate, I stepped closer and snapped a photo of the grave marker. "What was that?" Megan asked. "Just snapping a photo of the gravestone," I explained. "In addition to the lettering, there's also an engraving of a flower." "What's it look like?" she asked. The workers wanted me out of the way, so I stepped back and consulted the photo on my phone. "It's round and puffy with lots of small petals." "Hang on." I heard murmuring in the background, and several seconds later Megan returned. "Roxanne thinks it's a marigold," she said. "The marigold is a symbol of grief and mourning," Roxanne yelled in the background. "Did you hear that?" I could have heard that even without the phone. "Thanks, Roxanne." Any further conversation was drowned out by the earth mover, which roared to life as it began its task. "What we have here is a brilliant illustration of exceptional dirt displacement and management," McHugh was telling me, as the workers created a larger and larger pile of earth next to the headstone. "First-rate work, really. My hat's off to the team. Very nicely done." I looked at McHugh to see if this was a joke, but he seemed genuinely impressed with the efforts of the groundskeepers. I had to admit, this admiration was well-founded, as they had done a remarkable job of unearthing Archie Banks' grave while keeping the surrounding graves and path clear and unobstructed. The team was just in the process of pulling the coffin from the ground using ropes and a pulley. I whispered this progress to the folks listening back in the pub. "It will be interesting to see the level of decay after all this time," Angus said, his voice quiet and serious. "Oh, I would expect complete decomposition of everything but skeletal matter," DeVries said. "After all this time, I mean." "You think so?" Angus said. "Most definitely," DeVries replied. "Well, it depends on the type of wood used for the coffin, doesn't it?" Roy said as the three men warmed to their morbid chat. "And if the body was embalmed, in an oak coffin, for example, I believe it can take decades for thorough decomposition to occur." "And, of course, you have to take into account the local water table," DeVries added. "As well as the type of soil," Angus said. There was a loud grumble from the machinery, and I turned to see the coffin had been extracted from the grave. It was being lowered rather shakily onto a nearby plot of cleared land. McHugh followed the small cadre of police as they moved toward the dirt-encrusted box. I steered clear of them and instead made my way up a slight incline to the right of the gathering. After I reached the top of this small hill and turned back, I realized I had discovered the perfect position to see into the coffin when the lid was removed. I alerted the folks in the pub to my new position. "Just what are they expecting to see when they open the bloody box?" Angus whispered. "No body, just a note saying, 'Ought to kill some old mates back in a bit.' Best case scenario is the casket is empty, proving Banks is still around and they now have a perfect suspect," Davis DeVries said. "Second that," Roy agreed. "Short of that, finding a body, which, via forensics, turns out to be someone other than Archie Banks, would be a significant outcome, DeVries continued. Dental records, that sort of thing, Roy said. With all the old guys whispering in my ear, it felt like I was listening to a morbid AARP golf tournament. Most likely. With no heirs, not sure how DNA would enter into the equation. They will most likely rely on dental records, DeVries said. Isn't it wonderful how the police procedurals on television have made quasi-experts of us all? I feel I could speak intelligently on this topic for hours. Before I could agree or disagree with that assessment, the sound of wood splintering signaled the coffin was being pried open. Moments later, the top had been removed, and, as I had thought, my vantage point gave me a bird's-eye view of the coffin's interior. A quick shout-out to Hollywood horror films. For all their failings, apparently they do get at least one thing consistently right: the way a body looks in a coffin after it's had years and years to decompose. The sight before me could have been a perfect, if low-key, Halloween decoration on any suburban front porch. An assemblage of pale, gray-white bones poking out from the remains of a dark gray suit. A stark skull with a fixed and crooked smile. Bony hands protruding from the sleeves. I made a sudden deep intake of breath and stepped back. "Oh," I said. "It just occurred to me I don't think I've ever seen a body in such a state." "Isn't it what you expected?" Angus asked in my ear. "I guess so," I said with a shudder. "But it just makes me feel, I don't know, dirty, I guess. I think I may have to take a good long soak tonight." "Good thought," Angus agreed. "I may do so as well. What else do you see, Eli?" This was from Harry, who had been strangely silent throughout. "Well," I considered, looking at the pile of bones in the box below me, "the suit still looks pretty good. It's gray, double-breasted." "Hey, I think I remember that suit," Roy said suddenly and a little too brightly. "I had one just like it. Probably still do." "It's not the suit that interests us," DeVries said. "I'm more interested in what is on or not on his right hand." As if to answer him, one of the detectives stepped away from the coffin, widening my range of vision. And there it was, the red ruby ring worn by all the members of the mystical Magi was wrapped around a thin third finger on the skeleton's right hand. "Yep, he's wearing the ring," I reported via my Bluetooth. "Then that's clearly him. Good thing we never made him give the damn thing back when we tossed him out of the magic circle," DeVries muttered. I began the slow climb down from my vantage point while the police tech team began the process of removing Archie Banks' remains from the decaying coffin. "That's funny," I heard Roy say as he turned away from the phone. "I thought we did get the ring back." "This is really lovely," Megan said, as she stopped to admire a large, worn statue of an angel marking one ancient grave. The skeletal remains of Archie Banks had been removed and the excavation team had finished refilling the now empty grave. McHugh and I gave our short report to the folks in the pub, and while everyone else dispersed to points unknown, Megan and I had headed back to the cemetery for a more complete tour of the grounds. Harry had been correct in his suggestion that we should add the ancient cemetery to our tourism short list, as the graveyard was well worth a longer expedition. I looked up at the large statue, which stood at a slightly askew angle over a worn and illegible gravestone. "I'm always amazed at the lengths people go to when it comes to commemorating death," I said. "Or celebrating life," she suggested as we ambled on. "Leave it to you to put a positive spin on a cemetery," I said, giving her hand a quick squeeze. We walked for several moments in silence and rounded a corner, suddenly facing a long row of large mausoleums of Greek, or more likely Roman derivation. "Do you want to be buried when you die?" she asked. This was certainly a reasonable location for such a question, but nonetheless, it took me a bit by surprise. I haven't given it a lot of thought, I said, but it seems sort of silly to go to all the trouble and expense. You're interested in saving money after you die? That might be the only time I can, I offered, particularly if I have a coupon. How about you? She stopped at an iron gate marking the entrance to an impressive stone vault, peering into the murky darkness. I used to think I wanted to be cremated with my ashes spread over the flowers at the rose garden by Lake Harriet, like I did with my grandmother. I didn't know you were allowed to do that. You're not, she said. There's some sort of silly law against it. A law against distributing human remains at random locations throughout the city? Give me the petition to strike that one from the books. I'm ready to sign. She laughed. It's a garden. What's the big deal? I had to admit, in reality, it didn't strike me as being such a big deal. So you were told you couldn't spread her ashes? Yep. And you went ahead and did it anyway? Well, not all at once. Any time I was going to visit the rose gardens, I'd open her urn and pour some of Grandma into a baggie. Then, when I was walking through the garden, I'd flick a bit here and there. Like the POWs in The Great Escape, I suggested. Although they were dumping dirt to cover up their tunnel building, but the concept is the same. Anyway, it didn't take long, Megan continued. She wasn't a large woman. So that's what you want done with your ashes? She shook her head, grabbing onto the bars, blocking entry to the tomb, and giving them a bit of a shake. It was until today. Now I think I want a tomb. A mausoleum. Something big and impressive that will last forever. Like the library at Alexandria? She cocked her head to one side. I suppose forever is a relative term. I suppose it is. Megan started suddenly and turned around. She scanned the row of tombs across from us and then looked back the way we had come. What's up? She shook her head. I just had the sudden feeling we weren't alone. I gestured to the row of vaults, many of which held multiple generations. We aren't alone. There could easily be 100 people entombed within just a few feet of us. No, not dead people. I've got no problem with dead people, she said, still surveying our surroundings. It's the living that can give me the creeps. You ever get the feeling someone is watching you? Not until you just mentioned it, I said, feeling the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. Have you seen enough tombs for the time being? I have. Once we got away from the long row of mausoleums, I could sense Megan begin to relax, which in turn helped me to calm down. We spent the next few minutes looking at really old tombstones, remarking how disturbing small statues of cherubs actually are. Those freaky fat baby angels, as Megan preferred to call them, and enjoying the impromptu nature walk. The paths were twisty, and the landscape covered with trees, so it didn't take long for us to get lost. Not hopelessly lost, just lost enough. Megan has no real sense of direction, and so it often falls on me to keep us headed on the right track. After several turns, I was beginning to feel I was doing my job quite badly. I did keep a lid on feelings of panic because I recognized we were inside a fenced enclosure and eventually had to end up somewhere. After a few tense minutes, I was relieved to round a bend and see Lawrence Baxter standing in front of a grave marker. Oh, Eli, you'll find this interesting, he said when he saw us, not in the least surprised. He waved us over as if we'd just wandered in from another room at a ritzy cocktail party. This is the grave of David Devant. Who's that? Megan asked as we approached. The name rang a bell, but I couldn't provide anything resembling an actual answer. Luckily, Baxter, still in host mode, was already on top of it. Devant was a predecessor of mine, after a fashion. He was the first president of the Magic Circle. I nodded in agreement, as if it had been the answer I intended to give. In fact, he continued, the room where Eli and I met at the Circle is named for him, the Devant Room. Of course, I agreed. Quite the legendary magician was our David Devant, he went on, brushing aside some leaves from the grave marker with his foot. You know about his egg bag routine, of course? Of course, I lied. What was his egg bag routine? Megan turned to me, and I feigned I was about to answer, then gestured to Baxter as the greater authority. Oh, high water mark indeed, he began, as I turned my attention to studying the grave marker. It was a very simple tombstone. Besides the name and the birth and death dates, there was not much to hold my attention. Not even a nice flower engraving like on Archie Banks's tombstone. And they say the routine even made the Queen laugh during a Royal Command performance, which is no small trick, Baxter said as he finished his explanation of the egg bag illusion. Based on what I had overheard, it was just the normal egg bag routine, with an egg continually appearing and disappearing inside a cloth bag, but was taken to new heights with Devant's performance skills. So while others of note are buried in the east section of Highgate, Baxter continued, Karl Marx, George Eliot, Anthony Schaeffer, and the like, I always make a point to visit the west section and the grave of Mr. Devant when I'm in the neighborhood. He turned and began to saunter away, so we joined him. I assumed if he knew where David Devant's grave was, he would also know how to get us back to our starting point. As it turns out, there is an interesting point of connection between David Devant and the late Archie Banks, he continued as we walked alongside of him. Both were ousted from the magic circle. In Devant's case, twice. So apparently they took Devant back, at least once, I said. Oh, they did both times, Baxter laughed. They would hardly name a room after him if they didn't. What did he do wrong? I asked. Was he stealing material like Banks? Nothing so brazen, no, Baxter said, stopping to right some flowers that had tilted to one side in front of a gravestone. They claimed he divulged magic secrets in 2 books he'd penned. It caused quite the uproar at the time, outrage at the shocking exposure and all that. Imagine if they saw the exposure on YouTube these days, I suggested. Indeed, he agreed. It would induce a mass panic, if not collective embolisms. Anyway, I always felt a special connection to old Devant. That was one of the reasons I wanted a house in Hampstead. It was his old stomping grounds. And so it went. The next few minutes consisted of an amiable, guided nature walk, with Baxter pointing out some unique vegetation found in the cemetery. And that one there's a hearty little beast, he said, although I have absolutely no success getting one to thrive in my greenhouse. Just infuriating. I think some things can only survive in the wild, Megan suggested. People and plants, they just don't like restrictions. Well put, my dear, he said as we made one more turn, revealing the cemetery's entrance in the distance. Anyway, given how all this shook out, I'm not sure it was worth everyone's time to come all the way out here today. Did you think for a minute the coffin would be found empty when they opened it? I asked. Baxter shook his head. No, but I'm pretty certain the dental records will prove it is, in fact, Archie Banks in the box. Of course, we won't know for sure for several days, he added. But I agree with McHugh. Every avenue should be explored. He looked toward the cemetery's main gate, and I recognized one of his cars, idling, with the driver standing by patiently. Can I give you both a lift back to the Heath? He asked, gesturing expansively toward his car. I'm sure Megan would appreciate it, I said. I'm going to take the tube down to Leicester. Another West End visit? Baxter said as we neared the car. The driver had moved to the passenger door and swung it open. I have to settle some business with Jake North, I said. I made an appointment via his publicist to chat with him in his dressing room before the play tonight. Well, Baxter said, giving me a warm pat on the back. As we say in the theater, break a leg. I chuckled dryly. I think Jake can consider himself lucky if that's all I break. Well, a tour through a cemetery is never a bad thing.
Particularly if it's Highgate Cemetery.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever been there on your London visits. It's, I believe it was a subway trip and then a bus trip to get there, but it is impressive. It's on two sides of the road. Big over here, a little littler over there. I'm sure it's been in lots of movies because it has these lovely, a whole row of mausoleum kinds of things. You're going to find Mrs. Dickens, the wife of Charles Dickens, plus his parents are buried there. George Michael's buried there. Karl Marx is buried there. Ian Holm, Bob Hoskins, and the man who invented the Christmas cracker, which is a tradition in our house around Christmas time. I don't know about
Ours
you
too.
guys.
Yeah, no, ours too.
Is Tom Smith invented that. So if you get a chance, by all means, get over to Highgate Cemetery. You can have scheduled tours where they'll walk you through, or you can just kind of wander in on your own.
Take the scheduled tour.
Yeah.
You're always going to find something that you would not find if you were walking around on your own. Have you ever been to the cemetery in Edinburgh?
We have not.
Worth your time. And again, a scheduled tour for that. It's right next to the statue of Greyfriars Bobby, because that's where that little dog would go every day, and lay by the grave of his guy. But the woman who wrote all of the Harry Potter books, J.K. Rowling, spent a lot of time in that cemetery. And as you walk through that cemetery, you're going to find names on graves that appear in the Harry Potter books.
I do not dispute that, but I do know that one tour guide we talked to in Edinburgh said, everywhere you go here, they're going to say, yeah, and J.K. Rowling sat here and worked on the book, and she sat here and worked on the book, and she sat here and worked on the book. So, but I suppose the fact that the names are right there on the tombstones.
You're going to see them and go, oh, wow, that's just so funny that she got that there. But anyway, yeah, I think if you can tour a cemetery, and there's some great ones here in Minneapolis. I don't know, have you ever toured, what's the one in Minneapolis that, Lakehurst?
Lakewood Cemetery?
Yeah.
Down by Lake Calhoun?
Yeah.
I have relatives buried there. I've been through it a lot. I was thrown out of there for shooting a Super 8 scene of a private detective talking to a pope who was sitting on a gravestone eating lunch. Kicked right out. Can't do that. Kicked right out. And shot another scene there years later where used the idea of the Japanese idea of the borrowed view, which means you set up your yard so that you can see the pretty yard next door, and it, you get the benefit of that. If you stand on the hill on the park right on Kings Highway and shoot with a long lens, it looks like you're standing in the cemetery. We did a whole funeral scene and it looked just like it was in the cemetery when in fact the cemetery was a whole block away. More detail than you ever wanted to hear. Anyway, that is enough for this episode. We got to get moving.
one addendum to the Lakewood Cemetery. That is one of the places that I shot the original publicity photos for my original run of hauntings in 1986. None of them got used. I thought, here's what I'll do. I'll get a professional photographer. I'll put on an overcoat, and I'll be in the cemetery, and I'll have dry ice, and that fog will lift up, and it'll look like a ectoplasm and a ghost. It did, but unfortunately, I was behind the tombstone, and really, as the professional photographer said after we developed them, it looks like you're urinating on that tombstone, and the fog is simply because it's a cold day, and it's so we never got to use it.
That's a whole different show.
But I still have it for what it's worth.
Could you do me a favor and will you send it over? I'll post
I don't think I will.
Okay, we won't go with that.
We'll see.
Well, that's a delightful image to leave us with. Thank you, everybody. That is episode 516. Next time, we're going to talk to John Stirk, who served as president of the Society of American Magicians back in 2023, 2024, but also does a lot of other stuff besides being a magician. And we will dig deep into that next time with John Stirk and Chapter 17 of The Linking Rings. Until then, be careful what you do in cemeteries if someone's taking pictures.
That's good advice straight across the board. Take care of yourselves, and let's be kind to everybody.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Albertsbridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.